Welcome to Mindset U Podcast, your source of mindset education. We aim to provide you with free, valuable education for you to thrive. Enjoy. This is the fourth installment in the Change series, in which we explored how to create transformations in your own life. Do men and women require differences in order to create change? How about your race? Does your race matter? Stay tuned to the end as we give you an outline of all the tools we explored in all four podcasts.
So, question, does your approach change? Have you noticed changes or observation in your approaches when it comes to differentiating between men and women?
So, immediately, my first thought is that as you were asking the question, is my approach just changes session to session. But when you ask the men and women aspect, I don't know that I view that as such an important component when I'm sitting with someone. I'm not thinking to myself, I'm talking to a man right now, so let me shift to my man approach. I'm talking to a woman, let me shift to my woman approach.
But have you noticed reactions, the way that you respond to? I'm not saying that you intentfully change your approaches, but the way that you direct actions or create, perspectives or activities.
I guess it goes to when the moment that I'm building rapport with the person, that I'm poking and prodding to see what stimulates them, right? So if I ask this question this way, how do they respond? If I ask it that way, if I become really aggressive here, if I become really soft and soothing and supportive, how do they respond to those things? And then I start creating kind of okay, this is my approach with this person based off of that response. Do they become threatened? Do they become aggressive? Do they become introspective? By how I'm presenting it. So, and I'm going through the catalog in my brain between men and women that I coach, and I don't, again, it could be a bias that I'm not aware of, but I don't think I start with okay, I'm talking to a man, outside of the fact that if I'm talking to a man and we're talking about relationships, and they're straight, that I'm using that perspective of all right, you're talking to women, right? And I'm using that aspect of judgment and bias of understanding the dynamic. But the person as an individual and how I'm coaching them, I really, because from men, I've had the super aggressive type, macho, wanna measure dicks type of thing, to super sensitive man that's is questioning their manhood and all of that stuff. I've had that range, so I would be ignoring that range of clientele that I'll be having if I were to have a specific approach, if you will, and vice versa with women.
But I also think that there's unconscious biases that exist that are going to determine our approaches as coaches.
Those
right?
things are always reality.
Always, yeah. That's
I would say that in my awareness, that would be higher due to race than it is about gender.
Gender?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, to a degree. I think I can agree with you on that. Different cultures, interacting with a white man versus a Asian man versus a Hispanic male, right? The culture is different. You're going to approach it differently. But I also think maybe not so much in the practice, it's a harder degree of biases between men and women, right? I think race is a lot more observable, right? Because the cultures and the way we interact change, right? Traditions, language, all of those things that are being presented are significantly different. I think with men and women, that skill actually decreases, right? So it's harder to catch the biases.
Well,
But I do believe like there is a fundamental kind of approach that we take dependent on the personality, because we do have women that tend to connect to the more physiological aspect of an experience versus the mental construct of an experience. So like what you explained to me with the story and looking at the perspectives, right? And imagining, like, all of that work is a mental construct of an experience, right? But sometimes, especially not even men or women, but let's just say people at this point, when they lack the awareness and the vulnerability, the way to break through that wall is through create a difficult physiological experience. And then create awareness with thought process, dialogue, the mental construct behind that. Some people actually, I believe, gear themselves towards finding the physiology within the mental construct first, and then scaling them up to physiological experiences that go back to that mental construct that was developed.
So as you were talking, I thought about like one aspect that's different between men and women for me, which is like recognizing and observing their perspective towards me, right? Where these are things that have to be hyper aware of with, for example, if I'm talking to a woman, have no history, you know, I'm gonna be hyper aware of like how comfortable is she feeling? Does she feel safe, right? Because my intent is always to make the client feel safe. And that does look different from the start, from the jump, right? With women, like there's going to be that bias of like, in general, like and there's also the race factor and everything. Like, all right, I'm a colored man, right? So I know there's biases that are being carried with that, right? There's, I can overpower you. I can, all of this stuff that is like constantly threatening. And looking at it from a perspective of a woman is like, if you walked around and 50% of the people around you are more powerful than you, stronger than you, and you're counting on them to use that power, strength, and whatever in a responsible way, that makes you feeling very vulnerable, right? So recognizing that they're going to have biases already, and I have to address those things. So I'm talking to a woman, there's going to be biases based off of their past experience with men and so on and so forth. Like, I do have to recognize that and adjust my approach initially in order to build rapport, to get over that first initial hump. With men, on the same note, is like there's going to be a lot of factors that I'm looking at from that aspect, right? Where it's like body language is huge for both men and women, but a man being kind of like shrinking and in their skin versus a woman shrinking and under, there's going to be different perspectives in which I'm looking at them. The man being that is like, okay, it's probably person gets emotionally and pushed around and things like that. I'm going to think more emotionally. With a woman, I'm thinking more possible she's been physically pushed around or abused or something like that, right? So there's core judgments that come in that. When a man is like super the opposite side, super like aggressive, like meh, meh, meh. Versus a woman, it's like, all right, what are they trying to establish? For me, the man is trying to establish like he wants to feel like a man, wants to feel powerful, whatever. So it's like have to soothe them enough to say, hey, I'm not threatening that within you. I'm not challenging that within you, versus a woman being that the perspective I'm having of that woman is like, she probably has to constantly establish her dominance to feel heard and respected, right? So it's like my perspective on from them being just a man and woman, I'm looking at it differently from imagining what their experience is as the other gender or my gender is. So there is those aspects of biases, but I feel like that's the rapport building aspect as opposed to the ongoing coaching. You know, like I start off with, you have to start off with something, right? Like some sort of bias, and then from there you start to challenge it and question it and so on and so forth, and then I guess I get to the point of like now really reading the person as an individual and then going from there.
So I mean, I didn't want to get too far off the topic we started the podcast with, but I mean, it kind of fits in nicely with what you said last, where it's you got to start off with the biases for change, right? Like that's where you do start from a coach's perspective, but also from a client's perspective, right? Like if you're the individual trying to create change, you got to identify a bias within yourself to be able to create the change, because whatever you've been doing thus to this point has not allowed you to change. So therefore, there's a bias that needs to be identified in order to create that, to start it. And that bias is within your story, within your belief system, where you're like, oh shit, I've been thinking this way my entire life. And that, when you identify that biases, right? And
You're vulnerable enough to accept it.
Yeah, you don't go into cognitive dissonance and you accept it and you're vulnerable at that point. It sucks. It feels like shit, but you use it. Instead of running away from it, you go straight through it. And regardless, brings me back to the point from origination, right? Like at one point or another, you're gonna have to go through the pain. There's no way around it. And like we hear that cliche kind of term all the time, but either you're gonna go through it from a mental construct, you're gonna go through it through a physical construct. You can choose one, but at one point or another, you're gonna go through it. Like you may identify with someone who, like you may be a person that identifies with physiological pain better than mental or emotional kind of pain. You might be that person that's like, you were an athlete your entire life. You know what physical pain feels like. So it's easier for you to dive into that way and get through an experience and create change in that form than it is for you to sit with a therapist.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe for others is sitting down with a therapist or a life coach and dealing with that emotional pain, right, is easier than dealing with the physical pain. But no matter what, you're going through pain.
as the on-ramp, right? Because like that's the part of like, it's easier to begin the process in that avenue. But it's important that you learn to experience all of it.
All of it, yeah.
And you understand how to read all the data point.
Yeah.
To finish up, I just wanted to share one story that we've talked about in the past, which is like, it's my wife's story. She was at a conference, a professional development for work, and they did this very interesting game, right? Where it was like the frog game or something like that, they called it. So they put people in groups of 3, and you had one person that was just kind of observing and making sure everyone was keeping to the rules, right? You had one person that was guiding, and then one person that was blindfolded. And they had these little frogs that they put all around the room. So think of like a room of 40 people, right? In groups of 3. So you have all this dynamic happening at once. So the person that's blindfolded, they're trying to find as many frogs as possible so that their team can win. The person that's guiding gets specific instructions. So they do it once where that person can only give positive reinforcements. They do it once where that person can only give negative reinforcements. They do it a third time where that person can give both, right? And that third person is observing, making sure that, for example, they're only giving positive reinforcement if that's the rules. So that this is the concept of the game. So what my wife shares about this is that as she's blindfolded, she immediately goes into taking risks. She's limited in the data that she can see because she can observe because she's blindfolded. So she needs to collect more data. So she needs to take more risks. This is the perspective in which she sees it, right? She observed others who became blindfolded and immediately shut down and were waiting for instructions. So now think of this. If I'm only able to give you positive reinforcement, I need to wait for you to take an action to say, good. If you take a negative action, I need to be quiet. Now, vice versa, if I'm giving you negative, I need to make sure that you're doing something in order to say that's wrong. And when you start doing something right, I need to be quiet, right? So that's the dynamic. So now you have someone who's afraid, blindfolded, who's afraid to take a risk. They're receiving no input. They're static. My wife quickly learned I have to take as many risks as possible. So she's just reaching around. She says she's grabbing boobs, butts, penises, everything. She's just reaching around like no F's given. And what happens is she can get feedback immediately, no matter what aspect of the game they're playing, positive, negative, both. Now, the speed in which she won the game all 3 times, the speed in which she was able to win the game increased when she was able to be given both, positive and negative, right? Because now you're getting all the information in. You're taking risks, you're learning if you need to adjust positively, continue a path, or adjust because you're going entirely the wrong way. So she collected the most frogs immediately, right? With the other 2, either way, in order to get input, you're doing it wrong. She needed to take actions. When they were quiet, she wasn't so certain. Now she slowed down a little bit, so that slowed down the process. But again, being able to see the full spectrum, to go into that discomfort of like, I'm doing something inappropriate, I'm grabbing your boob, my VP of sales. I'm looking like a fool, right? I'm tripping over things. I just put my face in someone's butt. Like, there's a lot of risks there. You got to be willing to take. To then be able to receive data points and make corrections. And that's like, it's such a great game because that's exactly how change happens. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to take those risks to then learn the positive, the negative, the pleasure, the pain. You have to be willing to take the risks to create a new outcome, a new understanding, a new perspective.
Great. I think we should conclude with a summary of the first step to creating change.
Okay. So
we identified one is that you either are running towards pleasure or running away from pain.
If we take a step back, is like starting with awareness. Why? Right? Looking deep within yourself and trying to understand that original motive and then learning if it's pain or pleasure that you're running towards.
So then you identify those labels that you're putting on it, whether it's painful, and this you can use words as such as anxiety, fearful, can't, scared. Like, okay, so if you are identifying those words, what do those words actually feel like in your body?
What are the emotions?
What are the emotions behind it? Mm-hmm. And then from there, you can start to uncover the real why, which requires you to be vulnerable in the sense of it makes you feel emotionally intense, right? This can be in the form of crying. This can be form of anger, right? These are some of the labels we might place on that emotion. And then that belief or that construct and where that emotional intensity comes out is that root, like why. And then from there, you would have to listen to this next podcast to understand step 2 to create a change.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we did hit on is the dealing with that responsibility,
Oh,
that
yeah.
discomfort of that.
Like taking ownership, yeah.
Which
Taking
goes
ownership.
into that pain aspect,
Oh,
right?
that's gonna be our next.
So
next
that's a good
podcast.
segue
Yeah.
in which we're going to dive into like what responsibility looks like.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
What does your health, love life, spirituality, career, finances all have in common? Your mindset. Mindset is the source of creating change. To learn how to install these and other life-transforming concepts, browse through our free collection of courses at betheproject.com.